All right, it's 2:40. Go ahead and turn your videos back on if you're back from your palm, and we'll go ahead and get started here. So, advanced routing. I would say today's class, I'd say that today's class is less of like new information, new content, and really a little bit about the process of like how you should view your routes file and just kind of like when it comes to adding in more things to your routes file, how should you be looking at that? So we're going to start with this activity here. So pick a resource. So if you want to use dogs, that's fine. That was my example. But really just you pick any resource name. And I want you to list what are the 7 restful routes for your resource. So I want you to try to do this without looking it up. But if you have to, if you reach a point where you can't do it, go ahead and look it up. But I do want everybody to write those 7 down. For a bonus, you can write down the 8th restful route if you know what that is. And then for each of those routes, what Rails controller action does it map to? So that's kind of getting at RESTful routing is a internet idea. It's not necessarily Rails specific, but when it comes to Rails, each one of those will map to a specific Rails controller action. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing here is, given the model set up on the right, what would be the RESTful route to create a book for an author? And I've also got a hint here. So I'm going to give you all about 5 minutes to do it, and we'll check in and see if you all need more time. I also dropped the slides into the cohort channel if you need to pull those up and follow along. So let's take 5 minutes on our own. Let's take about 2 more minutes on our own. All right, let's come back together. Can I get a hand raise if you would like some more time for this activity? All right, not a lot of volunteers, so we'll just go ahead and go over it now. Let's get some volunteers here. So let's go students. Jenny. So Jenny, can you give me one of the, first of all, Jenny, what resource did you pick for your,
I just did dogs since that was the example.
So let's do dogs. Can you give me one of the RESTful routes for a dog?
Get/dogs. And that will go to the index on the controller, dogs #index.
Perfect. Adam, can you give me another one?
Yeah, it would be for like the show page, be get /dogs/ID, and then to dogs #show.
Perfect. Let's go to Chris.
Yeah, cool. You could do a post and then /dogs, and then take that to dogs #create.
Nice. Let's go to Qua.
We can do a get /dogs /new. And that would be to dogs/new. Sorry, #new.
You got it. Harrison, can you give me another one?
Wasn't unmuted, sorry. It's a get /dogs/edit. And this one will go to dogs #edit.
Mm-hmm. So this is really close here. There is one thing we're missing. Harrison, how would we know which dog we're editing?
Yeah, forgot the ID. Sorry, I did it a little. I did a little differently in mine, so I didn't have that.
Mhm. So where does the ID go?
Right after dog, like before the edit, after dogs and the slash.
Got it. Let's go to Megan. Can you give me another one?
Let's see, dogs get or patch dogs slash ID.
Sorry, got ahead of myself.
Oh, you're good. And then that gets you to update.
Cool. And then I think we've got one more. Kyle, do you know which one it is?
I'm gonna go with destroy.
Mhm.
And that'll be dogs ID, and then to the delete action in the controller.
And you're really close with this one.
Destroy action.
Destroy action.
No, I don't. No, I'm actually not sure.
You've got it. So the destroy is correct here. What's the HTTP verb? It's not destroy. Do you know what it is?
Delete.
Yeah, this is delete. Yeah. So I'd say this is the most, this is the easiest thing to mess up. The HTTP verb is called delete, but the RESTful action is called destroy. I guess someone just really wanted to make it harder on us and just have those two words, but that's what we've got. Yeah, great job, y'all. So you all did great with this activity. This is something that we've done before, and it's not something necessarily new, but knowing these RESTful routes by heart is very, very important. Can I get a volunteer for this next part here? So if we have an author that has many books and a book that belongs to an author, what would the route be for creating a book for an author? Harrison.
So I think it would be post. Oh, wait, are we doing it for an author or for dogs?
Sorry, I'm just trying to
Okay.
organize it here. Okay, so a post.
Yeah, I think it's a post. And then I have two author book, like slash author books.
Like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I included after that the author ID. Oh, so yeah, it's still in the
Got it.
and then
Okay.
I also included the book ID after that.
Maybe like that.
Yeah.
And then where would we route those to?
The author books create.
Great. So I would say this is maybe one potential way to do it. Does anyone have any other, did anyone come up with anything else? Alexa?
I did post and then / authors, then author ID, and then books. And then I did that to books, to new, or to create, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Alexa, just to remind us, what's the difference between new and create? In terms of actions, controller actions?
New, honestly, I'm a little unclear on what new does exactly.
Mhm.
I know it in the model form, if you do .new, that creates a new record without saving it to your database. But when it comes to routes, I feel like the new isn't needed all the time.
Yeah, so you're hitting on a key idea that new and create, yes, there are active record methods for create and new, and those are different. But then in terms of routing, there's a separate issue here. Does anyone want to explain for us, why do we have new and create routes? Why do we need these two routes? Kwa?
You get the information from the new page and you post it to the index, which is the create routes.
So you said like this is where we get the information, and then
Yes.
here where would it be like create the
Creating-
record?
Yes.
Yeah. So in terms of getting the information, what are we going to see on this page? How are we going to get that information?
It's going to be a form with a method get.
And the form might not necessarily have a method get. In fact, the form would have the method post because it would be posting to this route right here.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the key difference here. So to Alexa's point, this new route will show us the form to collect the information. This post route is where we're actually submitting the information. So it's a two-step process. So if you're just like a regular person using the website, it makes sense. Like we need to see a form and then we need to hit the submit button. But yeah, if you're like a hacker and you know how to bypass this stuff, yeah, you could just send the information directly to the create route, but that's not really who we're creating this application for. All right, so I would say that this is this route that Harrison walked us through here for posting to author books. This is potentially one way you could create an association, but why is this not necessarily going to work given these models that we have here on the right? Does someone want to walk us through that? Genevieve.
I think it's because we only have a one-to-many relationship rather than a many-to-many.
Exactly. So if we have author books in our route, that is indicating that there's an author book resource. And just kind of like using my context clues, that seems like it's setting up a many-to-many between authors and books. But as Genevieve just said, if we look at the models, it's not a many-to-many, it's a one-to-many. So if this was a many-to-many, and that would make sense, right? Like maybe we want to give our app the ability for books to have co-authors. So not just one person wrote this book, there are several people that wrote this book. Then we would have a many-to-many with author books. But with a one-to-many, we're not going to need this route right here. Another thing to point out here when it comes to RESTful routing is typically when you have an ID in your route, you first identify what that ID is for. So if I'm posting here to author books, I wouldn't just want like 2 IDs in here. I would want to say like this ID is for the author by saying author / and this ID is for a book by saying book /. So typically you don't just throw in the ID, you first identify what is the ID for, and then give the ID like that. For this activity, I would say this is the one that we were looking for. Post to authors, author ID, books. So the key piece here is going back to our models. If an author has many books and a book belongs to an author, we can't just create a book. We have to know what author we're creating the book for. So in our routes, we identify which author it is that we're creating a book for. Any other questions on this activity? This is like really core information. I want to make sure that we're feeling good about this before we move on. Kwa.
So if I would still use the top routes, but I would actually do the create is going to be through like author books # create. So I would create a relationship between author books just to create that one-to-many, and it's still going to go through the same process. It's just the controller. Is that a bad practice or unconventional way to go? Or if not, what would be the advantage of doing it that way?
So I would say this route here is the most conventional way to do this. If you said like you might have an author books controller, so the way I would represent that is like this with a /. So I'll say author / books. In this case, I would only do this if I already had a regular books create that I couldn't use. If I didn't, if there wasn't a books create that already existed that conflicted with this, I would just put this in the books create, in books controller and a create action.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Ben.
Yeah, and this might be a question that requires further explanation and can be summed up in like a few lines, but when we have a many-to-many relationship, um, something that I'm just kind of confused on and maybe just need more practice with is at what point are we delegating these actions to like let's say that we had a many-to-many relationship with these authors and books, and are we keeping the creation of books into the books controller and actions and stuff like that, or what example actions would you put in that join table controller?
Gotcha. Okay. So when it comes to the controller name, typically the controller name indicates what resource are we affecting. What resource are we CRUDing is another way of saying that. So when it comes to a many-to-many relationship, if it is a many-to-many relationship, think back to our joins class, our many-to-many class, when we wanted to create an association between a many-to-many association, we had to add in a new row into that join table. So author books, assuming that this was a many-to-many, author books create, I would say, is the most restful way of associating an author with a book. So that's an example of an action that might go in the join table controller. Another example would be author books destroy. If we wanted to remove a book from an author or an author from a book, we wanted to delete that association, that would be destroying the author book, the join table record. If you were storing other attributes on your join table, you might have an update action, but you probably wouldn't have like an index action. For instance, like show me all the author book records. That would be kind of like an odd thing to have in your application.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Good. So it really comes down to what CRUD action am I doing? Am I creating something in this table? Am I editing something in this table? And that should correspond to table name and then action that you're taking on that table. All right, let's go ahead and take a palm here. We'll come back at 3:08 and we'll jump into the next activity. All right. Let's go ahead and get started again. I do want to present this. Okay. So the next thing I'm gonna have you do is explore. I think that conversation was great to like kind of ground us in the key concepts among routing, which is RESTful routing, using IDs to identify what you're trying to affect in the database. The next activity is going to have you do some exploration, but first I wanted to talk about Rails routes. So Rails routes is a tool that you might have used or you might have seen before, but you maybe don't use too often. And so this is a tool that we really should be using, especially in this activity as we're learning about routes. So Rails routes shows you all of your routes. Another way that you can think of this as, you can think of it as the end result of the code in your routes file. So let me show you all what my conveyor belt app routes file looks like. So I've got conveyor belt here. It's got a bunch of different things in here. We're mixing and matching some hand rolling. We've got a namespace. We've got resources. We've got nested resources. We've got this like mount sidekick thing. There's all of these routes. There's all this junk in my routes file. I can see what the quote unquote the output of my routes file is by running Rails routes from the command line. When we do that one more time, yeah. And so if I blow this up a little bit, this is going to show me all of my routes. So it's going, the way that we can look at this is with 4 columns. So we've got a column for prefix here. We've got a column for verb. We've got a column for URI pattern. You can also think of this as the path. And then we've got a column for controller action. So we can just ignore the prefix column for now. I'll talk about that later in this class. But for now, we can see essentially what we did in that warm-up activity, which was mapping verb and path with controller action. So when it comes to routes, if we want to see how something affects the routes file, put it in your routes file and run Rails routes. So for instance, that if I look at that like mount sidekick thing, well, I don't know exactly what this does. So let me just look at my routes file, and it looks like it creates a pattern or a route where we have, I actually don't see anything under this verb, which is interesting. And we have /sidekick, and the controller action is sidekick web. So this is like a unique route here, but we can see like how it works by just looking at my Rails routes output. Something we might be more familiar with is something like this clone route, where we have get to /clone/ID, and it goes to clones show, something like that. So using Rails routes to see what is going on with your routes file, very important tool here. So this is going to show us the verb, the path, and the controller action, like I just said. This also shows the prefix, but we'll talk about that a little bit later in this class. Here's another way that you can use Rails routes. So Rails routes -c and then give it a controller name. So as our routes file gets really big, looking at the output of Rails routes can get very, very complicated. So rather than looking at all of the routes, it's often helpful to just look at routes for this controller. So I'll show you how that works. If I go over here and I see I have sessions controllers, I have a dashboard controller, I have a login, I have admin clones, I have clones. Let's say I just wanted to look at all the routes for, I don't know, let's look at these sessions routes. I would say Rails routes -c, and then I would add in here sessions. And I think I had an extra S in there. So it says no routes were found for this controller. So I'll take out that extra S. And now I can see I'll just get those routes where sessions is in the controller. And then similarly, if I wanted to just look at my clones controllers, I could put in -c for clones. And you'll notice that not only does this give me the regular clones, but it also gives me admin/clones as well. So -c will give you any route where what you put in here for the -c is included anywhere in the controller name. So because this is admin/clones, it picks up on that as the clones controller. I could also just do like partial matches like LON And it should match that to my clones controller as well. So we can see that. So in general, when we're learning something new with coding, a great thing to do is just try it and observe its effects. So anytime like you read something and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is going to work. I want you to for your process to be like, cool, a new thing. Let me go use it. Let me go see if it's going to break a bunch of stuff. Code is cheap, code is free, so we can always like go back and delete it if we want. And nothing that we're doing here in mod 2 is mission critical. So if we end up breaking something, first of all, it should be easy to undo it, especially when it comes to routes. But if we do break something, like no big deal. We're not going to like harm anybody. We're not developing code for like complex medical devices right now. We're really just kind of experimenting. So for this activity, adding code into routes.rb and just checking out Rails routes, great thing to do. You do not have to just limit it to what we're showing you in this activity. Before I move on to the specific activity, does anyone have any questions on that Rails routes tool? I guess one thing that I'll throw in is that you will see this also shown as rake routes. But as we've talked about with rake commands, they are synonymous with the Rails version. So rake routes, Rails routes are going to be the same. All right, so I've got an exploration activity for you. I want you to use that routes.rb and Rails routes to explore what each of these 3 blocks of code will do for your routes file. And then if you have time, I have 2 other things for you to explore down here. But if you don't get to those, that's okay. The key things we want to look at today are resources, resources do with a block, and then namespace. And I'm going to put you into some breakout rooms. So you all should be experimenting and talking through this with each other. And when we come back together, I'll want to hear from you all what you found out about each of these, the first 3. Any other questions before I put you into your rooms? Brisa.
Can we actually I have no idea how to phrase this. So we're working with dogs and owners. Do we have like a repo off of this, or do we just pull up a brand new fresh terminal? And I have no idea how to work with this.
That's a good question. So when it comes to routing will work no matter what app you're in. So I could go into my conveyor belt app here and I could just comment out all these other routes just to simplify things. And I could take that code for resources dogs only, and then I think it was show, update, destroy, like this. And then, oops, I can run Rails routes and see what that does. And so I want you to look at this and say like, okay, what did that do for my app? So Brisa, to your point, it doesn't matter as long, this is any Rails app. I would say setlist is probably the one you have the easiest access to, but literally any routes file and any app. Anything else? All right, I'm going to start you all off with 15 minutes for this. Oh.
Brandon,
Hey, what's up?
I'm getting an issue right here. Show you what's going on. So I put those in right here. And then down here, just running just Rails routes, I was getting this, which might be more legible for the chat.
I see that your it looks like it says Blogger at the front.
I guess maybe that's not where. Oh, this is the mid mod I was doing, and that's probably why I need to do it in this one. Aha.
I think that's it.
That's the one I was messing around with this, but that's why. Okay. So now I should be able to go something like that.
Oh, wow. This is awesome.
I think so.
Did I do that right?
Oh, and that's just a spelling for resources on line 7.
Oh, okay.
You have a C instead of an S. Yeah, I think you're good to go.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Alexa.
Hello.
Is your Zoom working okay now?
Yeah, it's weird because it works fine all day, and then at like 4 p.m. like clockwork, it kind of stops working. I thought it would be based on like how many people we had in the class, but for the PD it was fine, and there was 50 of us. So I don't know if it's time to go to the Apple store potentially, and just have them make sure everything's operating as it should. But
yeah, I don't know. What are you seeing when you say like Zoom stops working?
so everything will be normal, and then all of a sudden all the Zoom windows disappear, and I get just like almost like the login window, just a blank box, and it says, or it has like a little circle as if it's loading. And like it was fine all day, and then when we had the class talking about the project, within 20 minutes it did that 5 or 6 times. So I don't know like why it can go days with being okay, and then all of a sudden it has a meltdown. But yeah, it's like I thought I had it figured out. I thought it was the more people in Zoom that was the issue, but PD disproved that today. And it's not my home Wi-Fi because everything this is like the only issue. No other Wi-Fi issues.
Yeah, I would be tempted to say that it's more of a Zoom issue than anything. I wouldn't assume that it would be a laptop issue.
Yeah, maybe I do just need to completely wipe it from my computer and start again.
That might be it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't know what else you could try. Could you have you updated your Zoom or have you checked for updates?
I thought I did, but let me see.
It'd be worth double checking.
That would be in the preferences.
Yeah, so if you click on Zoom, or no, not under preferences. If you click on, if you're opened up Zoom in the top left on your desktop, you should have zoom.us, and then there should be check for updates.
Oh, okay. Oh, there is an update. Okay.
So you could try that and see if you get any better performance.
Yeah, I'm gonna hop off and try this now. Since this is being recorded, I think if I need to, I'll go back, but.
Yeah, I think you're good to do that.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for the help with this.
You're welcome. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'd like to call on some more people and hear what you all came up with for each of these. So let's hear from Will is going to go first. Now let me get my screen share set up. So Will, can you tell us for this first one, what did you, in your own words, what did that do for your routes?
Glad I got that one, because that one made sense to me. It was essentially like automatically making my routes for the show, update, and destroy actions for the dog URI. So those were just RESTful routes and only the show, update, and destroy. And I think they had both put and patch in there as separate routes, but those were both routing to update.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what you're getting at with that patch versus put is that when we did this resources dogs exercise, we didn't talk about what the like bonus route that I mentioned was, but that is maybe the 8th RESTful route here, which is a put to dogs ID to also dogs update. So in practice, we don't use put too often. Normally, we're just going to do a patch. Joseph?
Is the put like meaning like you have to update the entire resource? Does that mean you have to update every attribute for this to work?
Essentially, yeah.
It's that simple. Okay.
Yeah. So and it's you said like so that it will work. It will probably still work if you don't update the entire resource. This RESTful routing is all about indicating our intent with our verbs in our paths. So if you don't do exactly what put indicates, it's not going to break anything. It's just not going to be following convention. So the convention is put updating the entire resource, patch updating a part of it. You can think of it as patch as like, just add a little patch to this thing that already exists, and put something entirely new in its place.
But if you are updating the entire resource and you use patch, is that against convention?
That would also be maybe a little bit. Yeah, I would say yeah, technically, but I don't know. I don't think it would really be an issue. In most cases, we can kind of just forget that put exists and just have patch be our update action or update verb, excuse me. Well, thank you, Will. Some other key things that Will said is that this is generating the RESTful routes. So in that activity that I had you do to start off with, that's why it's so important to know your RESTful routes, because if you don't, you won't know what routes these are generating. So knowing that this resources syntax is going to generate RESTful routes, very key. Let's hear some thoughts from Trevor S. on the second one here for these are nested resources.
Yeah, so what I took from that was you're essentially finding the RESTful routes or using the RESTful routes of dogs by owner. And that's what we're writing with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you say like by owner, that's to me that means like we're identifying an owner for a dog. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So let's actually look at the output here. Which one is it going to be? Just do the one. So we've got these new resources, Rails routes. And there it is. So just restating what Trevor said, same RESTful routes for our dogs, except now there's this specific owner in front of all of them. Jake.
Does this imply one-to-many or no?
This implies a relationship. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a one-to-many. So resources owners, resources dogs. This could be, I would say this could be a many-to-many or a one-to-many.
Okay, so just saying that a relationship exists, it's not worried about what kind of relationship whatsoever.
Exactly, yeah. So if I look at my, yeah, we'll just leave it there. Great. Let me show you some other things with this that I want you all to know. So those only options where we say like, let me do this again, like resources, dogs, This will generate all routes, all 8 RESTful routes for us, but we only want to create routes that we need. So if I only needed an index, I would do this. You can do the same thing with these nested resources. So I could say, well, let's be very clear. Looking at my Rails routes output, let me comment out resources dogs. These eight down here, these owner resources, this is created from the first line in my routes file right here. And then the dog ones are created from the nested resources dogs right there. So there's 2 different resources in here generating their own sections of these routes. So each one of these can accept their own options. So I could say only index for the owners, but then all of the dog resources. So I want you to take a minute to think for yourself, how is my Rails routes output going to change with this syntax? And now when I hit enter, we'll see now we only get the owner index route, but we still get the 7 dog routes that still have the nested owner for each of the dog routes. And so then same thing with dogs, I could say only create, maybe. And so then I would just have 2 routes generated from this. Let's go on to the next one. So I've got namespace for dog trainers. Let's hear from Erica.
Okay, so this one, it only, I don't know how to really talk through it, I guess, but it doesn't like create anything specifically for dog trainers. It only creates things for dogs within dog trainers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe rephrasing that a little differently, we're creating routes for dogs, but this namespace thing just kind of changes those routes a little bit. So unlike with nested resources, where we got resources for owners and resources for dogs, this is just affecting our route for dogs. Is that fair, Erica?
Mm-hmm. So would this be an example of a one-to-many relationship, or does it still not really apply here?
No. So when it comes to namespacing, this is not implying a relationship. Resources dogs and resources, resources owners, resources dogs implies there's owners and dogs and there's some sort of relationship between the two. That is not what namespace indicates. So let's hold off on that for just a second. Erica, how is let's be very explicit. How are our routes affected by this namespace?
How are our routes affected? They all have to go through the namespace first before you can get to the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got that. So the route itself, the path, so we're in this URI pattern here, this path is affected. And then what about on the controller action side? Is that affected?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So for these namespaces, it's going to add on to our path / dog trainers. And for a controller action, it's going to add a dogs / and then dog trainers / and then everything else. So if my namespace doesn't indicate, Ben and Joe, I'll get your questions in just a second. If my namespace isn't indicating a relationship, what is this namespace kind of indicating for us? How can we kind of think about this namespace? What's its purpose? Any ideas? Angel?
Could it be a many-to-many relationship?
Not quite. So it's not really a one-to-many. It's not a many-to-many. We're really not indicating any sort of relationship here. Katie.
I'm curious, is it a way to like maybe organize your controllers?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's organizing controllers, and I would say it's more of just organization in general. So if I go back to my project spec, if I can find it, we said in here, one of our learning goals was utilize, advanced routing techniques, including namespacing, to organize and group like functionality together. So that's what's going on here. We are organizing and grouping our functionality together. Yeah. So let's hear from Ben, and then we'll go to Joseph.
Yeah, so I was wondering about that controller action notation where you have the dog trainer / dogs. Is that indicating like a file tree of inside of the dog trainer's root folder you have? Then theoretically you could have like dogs controller or other controllers in that aspect. Is it just notating like a file structure?
That is correct. This is a nested folder structure. So under app controllers, we would have a dog trainers folder and then a dogs controller under that. So it's really nothing like conceptually different than what we've done in class. Like, oh yeah, routes map to controller actions. It's just now we can organize them in subfolders, which is just nicer.
And I had one other, so then you wouldn't want to like namespace anything that you needed a controller for, or like, because you would, if you wanted a dog trainer's controller, you wouldn't namespace into a dog trainer's namespace. Is that right? Or can you have like the flexibility there?
You wouldn't want to namespace into a dog trainer's name. So I'll say this, when we're using the resources syntax, that typically represents a resource in our database, in our application. So in this case, dog trainers isn't necessarily a resource. We're not storing dog trainers. It's that we are organizing it to say that these controllers deal with the dog trainer functionality. So for example, maybe dog trainers can create dogs. Maybe we're creating an app that tracks dog training. And so the dog trainers, they can create dogs and they can destroy them, and they have that kind of almost like admin level functionality, but maybe regular users can't do that. So maybe it will look like this.
Syntactic.
Yeah, it's all about syntax organization. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe like you have to be in this dog trainers group of functionality to create and destroy, but to just view everything, you don't need to be in that namespace. So maybe index and show are outside of dog trainers. So this says not only can dog trainers do this, everybody can do this. Joseph.
Yeah, you mostly just answered the big part of my question, but you can also, I'm assuming, so like you're in the dog trainers folder, so I'd assume you have trainers as well as dogs. So you could do underneath the dogs resources, you could do on line 32, you could do trainers resources as well.
Exactly, yeah. And so we've talked about this, but let's really describe what this looks like. So if we have dog trainers / dogs, it is expecting under app controllers a folder called dogs. And I'm doing this in the conveyor belt app, so there's some other stuff there, but that's okay. So it's expecting a folder called dog trainers, and we can see we already have an admin folder in there. So that's a little hint for you. And then under here, a dogs controller.rb. So this is where I would create my controller. And yes, if I wanted to have more resources nested under this namespace, I could then say like resources. Yeah, maybe we have like trainers in here or something like that. Or maybe maybe it's something completely different. Like maybe a dog trainer has CRUD functionality over the classes for the dogs, something like that. Trevor?
Yeah, so kind of touching again on that controller action, kind of referring to the project, because that's a little bit more understanding. I mean, I can understand that a little bit more. If we were to create an admin folder within the controller, and we wanted to create a model with like an admin dog, would that naming still work with the file path slash?
Interesting. So your models are accessible from anywhere inside your Rails application. So if you create a new model, it doesn't matter what controller you're looking at, it's just accessible everywhere. So you don't need to worry about that. When it comes to like creating a like admin model, that's not typically something that we do in Rails, because when it comes to models really just deal with the database. So models should be free from that kind of like application level of like application level logic, like who has access to this or where should this be used. Models should really just be, how does this work and relate to the database? So you shouldn't have like a separate admin model for that.
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe I messed some things up. It's been a long day, but what about with the views? I guess that's with the naming as far as that is concerned.
Yeah, so the views will match up with your controller naming. So if in this case, if I had in my dogs controller, I do have a slide for this, so I think I'll get here, but if I had, the way this would look would be class dog trainers : dogs controller. So the controller name now looks a little different. And this is going to inherit from application controller. And let's say I have like an index action in here. Oops, not with index. The views would follow a similar folder structure where it would be app views, and then we would have a dog trainers folder. And then inside that dog trainers folder, we would have a dogs folder. And then inside that dogs folder, that's where we would have index.html.erb.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Katie.
Yeah, so I just wanted to double check my understanding on this. If you were to go back to the page where you had the resources in the namespace, yeah. So you can have the dog trainers and you can have a nested resource for dogs that only has create and destroy. And then outside of that, outside of your dog trainers, you could have a separate resource called in your controller called dogs that only deals with the index and the show.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And what that points to is that every line in your routes file is just generating one of these routes. So you can mix and match them, you can combine them. At the end of the day, as long as your Rails routes produce the routes that you need, then you're good to go. So everything that we're talking about here is just syntactic sugar for what we already know how to do. I think the only new thing that we've added is this new slash syntax into the controller actions. So I really want to point that out. That is really the new routing concept here. Everything else is just shorthand for generating those routes. Joseph, do you have another question, or was that from before? Cool. Kwa.
So if you're going to do resources docs and only index and show, in that case, when we're like creating new as a shelters of pets, how do we do that? Do we kind of do that kind of like a basic, but that should only belong to the admins then? Does that make sense?
Not entirely. I think what you're saying is, no, can you ask that one more time?
So right now, because when we create, let's say dogs, right? Normally we would go through like the create action for dogs. And right now, when we go through the namespace for dog trainers and create the dog, is there a difference between those two?
Not really. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here, is that this doesn't do anything in your code besides say that this should be in a folder called dog trainers, and the controller name now has this like extra syntax in it. But other than that, it's still just like a regular create action. Like if I'm making a create action in here, I probably want to get my params. I probably want to create a dog params that does like params dot permit, and it only permits my certain params. And then in my create action, I'm probably going to do like at dog equals dog.new using those dog params. So
And
your
it-
controllers still work exactly the same. It's just that they're defined in a different place. So this really is just like organizational strategies.
And then when since the namespace has its own views and controller, and when we create the dog, we're still gonna redirect it to its normal dog view instead of like an admin dog index, right?
Probably, but it depends on your application. I mean, that makes sense. After you create something, redirect to the index, but you don't have to. It just depends on what you want your application to do.
I mean, I guess it's the posting, right? I guess I don't know what I'm asking. I got to figure something out. Yeah, I don't know what I'm asking right now. Sorry.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the key here is that this is really doing less than you think it is. I think a lot of times I see students, when it comes to these advanced routing techniques, think that more is going on than really it's nothing more than it's changing what route output we're getting here. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and for these last 5 minutes, I'm going to do a couple slides and that will just kind of tie together some of the things that we've talked about here. For scope and module and for regular scope here, those are two ways to essentially do namespacing separately. So those namespacing will do two things. It'll prepend to the route and it'll change the folder where the controller is defined. These are just how you do each of those individually if you need to. Okay, so namespace, there's a namespace route helper. This is going to add a prefix to the route. So when I say prefix, I mean it just like adds on to the beginning of the path. And it creates a nested folder structure for your controllers. So this is what that nested controller structure looks like. That's what I just showed you. So it's going to be dog trainers / dogs. And so it expects the controller to be defined in app controllers, dog trainers, dog controller.rb, dogs controller. And the controller class has this like nested name now as well. Technically, this is also called a namespace, which can be kind of confusing, but it's really just syntax you have to get used to. So that's really what you need to know about namespacing. Well, I guess this is the why behind it. So this is very useful for grouping similar routes and controllers together. So for instance, all of your admin controllers should ensure that an admin is logged in before any code can be executed. This is what you're going to study in Mod 3. So for now, we're having you use the namespace functionality, but it's not so much for this. This is more of like authorization. Only certain people should be able to access these routes. The one thing we haven't really gotten to today is the path helpers. So path helpers, this is where that prefix column comes in when we use Rails routes. So the way this works is that you can add _path onto any prefix, and this will call the path helper method. This will generate a path for you. So sometimes your path helpers need additional information, like it needs an ID, and you can pass those as arguments. So this is a very common way of using your path helpers, is if you have something like a link to, and I have link to view this dog. So this would probably take us to a dog show page. We would use the prefix here for the dog path, and we would have to pass it the dog object to give it its ID. So let me show you how that is going to work. I think the easiest way to demonstrate this is to pry into a test. So let me see if this is going to work. Let me just pry in here. So again, this is not really like specific to an application. So I'm doing this in conveyor belt, but really I just need a pry session. So I've got this right here, and then let me also do Rails routes right here. Rails routes. Okay, so this is my output from Rails routes. I think we're done with the code, with the actual code. So in my Rails routes, let's just look at these dog paths that we have down here. So it gives me prefixes for dogs is my index prefix. Whoops, dogs is my index prefix. And then dog is my show prefix. So dogs is the prefix. I can add underscore path onto this prefix and watch what happens. In pry, I'll say dogs path, and it generates that path for me. So this is a shorthand syntax for generating paths. So really what this boils down to is you don't have to use path helpers anywhere in your code. It just makes things easier for you. So it'll just generate these routes for you. So rather than typing in /dogs, I can just do dogs path and it will generate it for me. And then using the show. So when I do a dog path, notice how I need an ID here for a dog show route. So if I just do dog path, it's going to give me an error and it's going to say action controller URL generation error, no route matches, action show controller dogs. And it'll say missing required key IDs or missing required keys ID. So it's expecting me to pass something here as a ID. So I could pass like a 1 and that would generate /dog/1. And I don't have a dog object, but if you have a dog object like @dog here, it's smart enough to pull out the ID from that object and put that into your route. Joseph?
Yeah, did you assign that, or was it already attached to it?
That is that comes generated. You're talking about the prefix, right?
Yes.
These prefixes, that is generated for you when you use the resources syntax.
Okay. I noticed that post, patch, put, and delete do not have prefixes. How come?
That is because these, so see how all the paths are the same for them? It's dog trainers classes ID, dog trainers classes ID, dog trainers classes ID, dog trainers classes ID. So all of these would use this same path helper. So it's not going to give you a duplicate path helper. You would just use dog trainers class underscore path for any of these 4. So at the end of the day, I'm not going to teach you, I'm not going to be able to teach you everything about routing, but the important takeaways here is that all of our routes, this kind of like goes back to the beginning of the mod, all routes map an incoming HTTP verb and path to a controller action. The new thing that we've looked at here is that your controllers can be nested in folders. But at the end of the day, all these route helpers are just shortcuts. All I'm showing you is syntactic sugar for creating the quote unquote hand rolled, or I would say the Rails routes version of your routes. So as long as you can interpret, so some of the helpers and shortcuts we've talked about are resources do for nested routes, namespace, the path helpers, all of those just auto-generate things for you. So as long as you can interpret the output of Rails routes, that is your key to understanding routing. So I don't expect you to walk away from this class understanding everything about routing, but I do want you to know what tools you should be using so that you can understand routing. Andrew?
Are the scope and module not something we're expected to be using this mod?
I would not, yes, I would not expect you to use them, but they are cool tools that will just give you extra flexibility when it comes to making your routes. Yeah, we haven't, I don't think that there's any place in the mod where you have to be using them. All right, y'all, we're after 4. We'll wrap up here. Please take a minute to leave me some feedback on this class, and then we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
Brian.